Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is co-host Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Well, we have another problem we're going to solve, and this one is going to be very easy. We're going to solve the plight of the Kurds, and the Kurds have been suffering for a while. They, like many other people, would like to have their own country, their own region, and self-determination, but it looks like they've been struggling for a while, and I don't imagine the Versailles Treaty helped them any at all, and outsiders were drawing the lines, and they've been struggling. But, one of the unintended consequences of the Iraq War was that the Kurds ended up with some independence. And, northern Iraq, they ended up with some oil to deal with, and it's gone rather well from their viewpoint when you look back at recent history. But the Kurds have been very much engaged and instrumental in the battle against Assad because there's Kurds in northern Syria as well. And there was a major announcement yesterday, and this said the Syrian Kurds want to create their own region. They want to promote federalism. It's not like a new country, but they have made this announcement, and it's caught the attention of a lot of people. And I personally have sympathies for that, but nothing is simple, because there's always different factions. The Russians are there, the Americans are there, the Europeans are there. The war is affecting the European Union, and oil is over there. So there's a lot of factions going on. But what do you think the significance of this is? There was, to me, an unintended consequence, a good one, that the Kurds got a little bit out of the Iraq War. But I wonder if this could be a positive move in the direction, but it seems to be different because this is not Iraq, even though they're trying to carve out a spot in northern Syria. So the challenge, I think, is a little bit greater.
Yeah, the timing is very interesting, coming right on the heels of the Russian announcement. But backing up a little bit, the Kurds have been fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda for quite some time. They've lost a lot of blood fighting. And so my guess is they feel that they don't want to feel like they have fought in vain. Although they've had de facto autonomy under Assad for quite some time, this is a move, I think, to make it more institutionalized. They've been denied a place at the table at the Geneva talks, primarily by the U.S., which, to make things more confusing, has been sort of their protector in northern Syria. They've helped train them, they've given them arms, but they denied them a place at the table, perhaps under Turkey's insistence. So the move raises all sorts of questions about timing, what the result will be, what the relationship between Syria proper and this autonomous region, if it does develop that way, what happens to mixed areas. So there's more confusion, I think, than anything else.
And there's quite a few factions, nationalistic factions, that would like to not have this happen. I mean, Assad originally didn't say, let's give the Kurds their homeland and let's, set this aside. The Iranians have Kurds there, and they're probably not anxious to see a very, very strong Kurdish state, even though they're not as much concerned as others. But even unification of Iraq would want the Kurds to be part of Iraq, and that's why they aren't independent, but they're just, they have a little bit of independence, a little bit of federalism involved there. But the one country that probably is the most annoyed by this and the most fearful and maybe has done the most fighting with them, that would be Turks. The Turks really worry about this, and they've been at it, and this is not brand new. That's been on. So that'll be interesting to see how that pans out because, the Turks and the Kurds, very important people, and they're not involved in negotiations of how they're going to settle this dispute.
Yeah, it's difficult. The timing is strange for the Kurds in a way because they have had de facto autonomy. This would be a question that could be resolved in talks. How much further does it go? But with the Kurds declaring autonomy, if it moves on like in Kosovo to become some sort of an independence, they have fought against the same enemy as Assad, but they have been strong to say that not on the same side. We are not part of Assad's forces, but we are fighting the same enemies, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. What happens to the Kurds if they have de facto independence without the protection of Damascus? It seems to me that Turkey would take advantage of what would be a very weak and very small microstate in the region.
Yes, and I don't know whether that would be enough for the Russians to come back full force, but the Russians obviously promised that if things get out of hand and these negotiations don't go well, don't count us out. They haven't just walked away from all this, and they've invested a lot of political energy into this, and actually they're looking pretty good compared to some others, on moving this along. So Russia is not going to, I imagine they would have some sympathy for it, because behind the scenes, even though we couldn't announce it, we weren't yelling and screaming and trying to prevent the Kurds from a bit of independence in Iraq, even though our close NATO ally, Turkey, didn't like it at all. So it just goes to show that there's so many factions involved, whether they're the different factions fighting Assad and factions in Iraq and the conflicts there and Iran and all this. It seems like there's always been, for a long time, contentions there with the various groups, but it has been magnified so greatly by outsiders being involved. And who have been the outsiders? It's been, United States, our government, and it's been NATO has their finger in this. So it seems like outsiders are involved, but they haven't listened to us. They haven't decided it's time to go home. It's time to leave. They're very much involved, and the messier it gets, the more somebody's going to want to send more troops in. And from the debates going on right now, the candidates aren't very bashful about protecting our national security interests, and those lines where the Kurds live and this sort of thing. That's all dealing with our national security, which is a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, I think if you look back, U.S. foreign policy in the post-Cold War era, I believe, has been one of divide and conquer. And if you look back to Yugoslavia and how the U.S. helped pit the Serbs against the Croats, the Bosnian Muslims against them as well, they've been able to essentially conquer the former Yugoslavia. You saw the same in Iraq. You talk about the Kurdish North. They've divided, and they can set each side against each other. And I think that, to a degree, is what's happening in Syria, and that makes it complicated for us, because we like the idea of autonomy and of looking for independence, but when it's precipitated by outside forces with the intent on conquering two weak forces, it makes it much more difficult. So it does make you wonder. John Kerry suggested a couple of weeks ago that if the ceasefire in Syria doesn't come through, we're going to go to Plan B, which is dividing Syria up into different regions and different autonomous regions. And so one has to wonder whether this might be a sort of a part of their Plan B.
And, of course, that doesn't frighten me. I mean, I'd like to just get out of there, but that would be hopefully a reasonable thing to do. But they're not, although it's listed, the Kurds want this, it's the Kurdish region, but even the Kurds are avoiding, we're not creating a Kurdish region, we're creating a region in northern Iraq, and they use another term, but they don't call it a Kurdish region, but just trying to emphasize the principle of federalism and different groups. And for years, though, I've argued that if we weren't in Iraq and they got rid of Saddam Hussein, there would be regionalism. And there'd be, in Iraq, there'd probably be some religious regions, too. And maybe if the outsiders stayed out of there, they'd learn to live with each other. They've done it before, when there was less outside interference. So I think this could happen, but it's not likely going to happen under these circumstances, because there's so many fingers in the pot, and there's nobody likely to walk away. We're not going to walk away, and the Russians aren't going to walk away. The Turks aren't going to walk away. The Iranians are going to be standing and watching, and Assad can't go anywhere because everybody's pounding on him and saying that he's the only monster over there. So I see it as a big mess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's understandable that the Kurds, they have been fighting, and they want to come away with something for all the fighting they've done. So that certainly is understandable. The point I mentioned earlier is troubling, because there are a lot of mixed villages, and I probably mentioned this on the show before, but I remember in the 90s walking through Vukovar in Croatia and talking to some of the locals. And it's a terrible, burned-out city. It used to be one of the most glorious cities in that part of the world. And everyone I talked to said, we never knew that he was a Kurd or a Serb or a Croat. It was just never part of our thinking. They were our neighbors. And I worry now that some of these villages in Kurdish areas that are mixed, people might start noticing, oh, he's this and he's that. And that would be very upsetting, I think.
And that reminded me of the distinction that we had in this country. How did the Northerners distinguish from the Southerners? They couldn't. They had to have somebody create the issues to fight and kill families and brothers and all this. And at the same time, the only way they could tell them apart is put on a uniform. But it seems, that's why I think war is so artificial, in creating these things. And the way, what you're pointing out is that people, when they're left alone, they have an interest in living peacefully for not the benefit of one, but for the benefit of both. And this idea that the few who drift into governments, this is the problem. Governments have power and force, special interest gets control, and then they want to dictate. I think when the people are left alone, they're not looking for fights. They're looking for conciliation and trade, and when you had less powerful governments. So I see the issue as the governments have too much power, and the bad people take over. Now, if you don't have, if you had no government, which is not going to come, but if you have a lot less government, you'd still have a lot of bad people out there, but they would be dealt with in a much different way, in a local manner. But when governments get control and they're powerful, then the very bad people end up there, and they have all the answers. They want to tell you how to live. They want to tell you how to run the economy. They want to tell the rest of the world what to do, and they're just arrogant, and they believe that they're all powerful. And unfortunately, our governments are so powerful. I think that reducing the size and scope and authority of government doesn't eliminate evil, but it really reduces the effectiveness and the size of the evil, because the evil people wouldn't have any place to go. But as long as you have something that offers this power, and just look at power in our government, executive orders, going to war without declaration, running the economy, setting interest rates, entitlements as rights. It goes on, and that is so much power. And as long as they can just, regulate, write regulations, there's 450,000 regulations. Nobody can conceive of them in our own country. And that, to me, is the real problem, is powerful states and bad people getting in charge, and then they end up with this mess. And so whether it's the Russian oligarchs or the Americans over there telling other people what to do is a real problem. But I guess the odds of that dream coming true aren't very good for the moment.
Well, I was just thinking what you're saying, trade, which comes from individuals, unites people. War, which comes from governments, divides people. So there's the lesson, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And, the founders certainly understood that about trade. They said if you trade with people, you're less likely to fight with them. If you have trade wars, it most likely will lead to a hot war. And right now, I'm totally shocked that there's candidates right now that are bold and talking about tariffs and trade wars. Oh, that's good for us and hurts the enemy. And I think that is so off base that we should have more belief and confidence in free markets and free trade. But I don't think they're evil people because they advocate tariffs and trade management through international organization. They actually believe it's necessary and isn't harmful. I think they're totally economically ignorant when they come down so hard on voluntarism. But on the trade issue, the one thing I like to emphasize is it's the people's money, and they ought to be able to spend it any place that they want. And yet, no, it's always to be dictated by our governments on what they can do. This is the reason why smaller government is better, and smaller government would not attract so many violent people who want to get control and then go thousands of miles away from home, like here, and go over and get involved in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Yemen and all these places. It continues on and on. But my prediction is all that nonsense is going to end because we can't afford it. We're going bankrupt, but we ought to get prepared for it because it's going to be a very difficult time for all of us. And the only solution will be the restoration and the understanding of the true principles of liberty. And that is where I'm optimistic because we see more and more people understanding this. They're just waiting for the opportunity to promote those ideas and change our government. I don't expect that to be a consequence of the current election, unfortunately. We'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.